themselves. Not long afterwards there was again great dearth in the land, and the children heard their mother address their father thus in bed one night: "Everything is eaten up once more, we have only half a loaf in the house, and when that's gone it's all up with us. The children must be gotten rid of, we'll lead them deeper into the wood this time, so that they won't be able to find their way out again. There is no other way of saving ourselves." The man's heart smote him heavily. He thought, surely it would be better to share the last bite with one's children. But his wife wouldn't listen to his arguments, and did nothing but scold and reproach him. If a man yields once, he's done for, and so, because he had given in the first time, he was forced to do so the second. The children were awake again, and had heard the conversation. When the old people were asleep, Hansel got up, and wanted to go out and pick up pebbles again, as he had done the first time, but the woman had barred the door, and Hansel couldn't get out. But he consoled his little sister, and said, "Don't cry, Gretel, and sleep peacefully, for God is sure to help us." At early dawn the woman came and made the children get up. They received their bit of bread, but it was even smaller than the time before. On the way to the wood Hansel crumbled it in his pocket, and every few minutes he stood still and dropped a crumb on the ground. "Hansel, what are you stopping and looking about you for?" said the father. "I'm looking back at my little pigeon, which is sitting on the roof waving me a farewell," answered Hansel. "Sleep. God will not desert us," and he lay down in bed again. At daybreak, even before the sun was up, the woman came and woke the two children. "Get up, you liabets, we're all going to the forest to fetch wood." She gave them each a bit of bread and said, "There's something for your luncheon, but don't you eat it up beforehand, for it's all you'll get." Gretel took the bread under her apron, as Hansel had the stones in his pocket. Then they all set out together on the way to the forest. After they had walked a little, Hansel stood still and looked back at the house, and this maneuver he repeated again and again. His father observed him, and said, "Hansel, what are you gazing at there? Why do you always remain behind? Take care, and don't lose your footing." "Oh, father," said Hansel, "I am looking back at my white kitten, which is sitting on the roof, waving me a farewell." Hill. The brushwood was set fire to, and when the flames leaped high the woman said, "Now lie down at the fire, children, and rest yourselves. We are going into the forest to cut down wood, and when we've finished we'll come back and fetch you." Hansel and Gretel sat down beside the fire, and at midday ate their little bits of bread. They heard the strokes of the axe, so they thought their father was quite near. But it was no axe they heard, but a bough he had tied on a dead tree, and that was blown about by the wind. When they had sat for a long time their eyes closed with fatigue, and they fell fast asleep. When they awoke at last, it was pitch dark. Gretel began to cry, and said, "How are we ever to get out of the wood?" Hansel comforted her. "Wait a bit," he said, "until the moon is up, and then we'll find our way sure enough." When the full moon had risen, he took his sister by the hand, and at midday they saw a beautiful little snow-white bird sitting on a branch, which sang so sweetly that they stopped still and listened to it. When its song was finished it flapped its wings and flew on in front of them. They followed it and came to a little house, on the roof of which it perched, and when they came quite near they saw that the cottage was made of bread and roofed with cakes, while the window was made of transparent sugar. "Now we'll set to," said Hansel, "and have a regular blowout. I'll eat a bit of the roof, and you, Gretel, can eat some of the window, which you'll find a sweet morsel." Hansel stretched up his hand and broke off a little bit of the roof to see what it was like, and Gretel went to the casement and began to nibble at it. Thereupon a shrill voice called out from the room inside, "Nibble, nibble, little mouse. Who's nibbling my house?" The children answered, "'Tis heaven's own child, the tempest wild," and went on eating, without putting themselves about. Hansel, who thoroughly appreciated the roof, tore down a big bit of it, while Gretel pushed out a whole round window pane, and sat down the better to enjoy it. Suddenly the door opened, and an ancient dame, leaning on a staff, hobbled out. Hansel and Gretel were so terrified that they let what they had in their hands fall. The children answered, "'Tis heaven's own child, the tempest wild," and went on eating, without putting themselves about. Hansel, who thoroughly appreciated the roof, tore down a big bit of it, while Gretel pushed out a whole round window pane, and sat down the better to enjoy it. Suddenly the door opened, and an ancient dame, leaning on a staff, hobbled out. Hansel and Gretel were so terrified that they let what they had in their hands fall. The children answered, "'Tis heaven's own child, the tempest wild," and went on eating, without putting themselves about. Hansel, who thoroughly appreciated the roof, tore down a big bit of it, while Gretel pushed out a whole round window pane, and sat down the better to enjoy it. Suddenly the door opened, and an ancient dame, leaning on a staff, hobbled out. Hansel and Gretel were so terrified that they let what they had in their hands fall. When Hansel and Gretel fell into her hands, she laughed maliciously, and said jeeringly, "I've got them now, they shan't escape me." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she rose up, and when she saw them both sleeping so peacefully, with their round rosy cheeks, she muttered to herself, "That'll be a dainty bite." Then she seized Hansel with her bony hand and carried him into a little stable, and barred the door on him. He might have screamed as much as he liked, for it would do him no good. Then she went to Gretel, shook her until she awoke, and cried, "Get up, you lazy bones, fetch water and cook something for your brother. When he's fat I'll eat him up." Gretel began to cry bitterly, but it was of no use. She had to do what the wicked witch bade her, so the best food was cooked for poor Hansel, but Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Every morning the old woman hobbled out to the stable and cried, "Hansel, put out your finger, that I may feel if you are getting fat." But Hansel always stretched out a bone, and the old dame, whose eyes were dim, couldn't see it. Thinking always it was Hansel's finger, she wondered why he fattened so slowly. When 4 weeks had passed and Hansel still remained thin, she lost patience and determined to wait no longer. "Hi, Gretel," she called to the girl, "be quick and get some water. Hansel may be fat or thin, I'm going to kill him tomorrow and cook him." "Oh!" How the poor little sister sobbed as she carried the water, and how the tears rolled down her cheeks. "Kind Heaven, help us now!" she cried. "If only the wild beasts in the wood had eaten us, then at least we should have died together." "Just hold your peace," said the old hag, "it won't help you." Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out and hang up the kettle full of water, and light the fire. "First we'll bake," said the old dame. "I've heated the oven already and kneaded the dough." She pushed Gretel out to the oven, from which fiery flames were already issuing. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it's properly heated, so that we can shove in the bread." When she had got Gretel in, she meant to close the oven and let the girl bake, that she might eat her up too. But Gretel perceived her intention, and said, "I don't know how I'm to do it. How do I get in?" "You silly goose," said the hag. "The opening is big enough, see, I could get in myself," and she crawled toward it, and poked her head into the oven. Then Gretel gave her a shove that sent her right in, shut the iron door, and drew the bolt. Gracious! How she yelled, it was quite horrible, but Gretel fled and the wretched old woman was left to perish miserably. Gretel flew straight to Hansel, opened the little stable door and cried, "Hansel, we are free, the old witch is dead." Then Hansel sprang like a bird out of a cage when the door is opened. How they rejoiced, fell on each other's necks, jumped for joy, and kissed one another. As they had no longer any cause for fear, they went in the old hag's house, and here they found, in every corner of the room, boxes with pearls and precious stones. "These are even better than pebbles," said Hansel, and crammed his pockets full of them. Gretel said, "I too will bring something home," and she filled her apron full. "Now," said Hansel, "let's go and get well away from the witch's wood." When they had wandered about for some hours, they came to a big lake. "We can't get over," said Hansel. "I see no bridge of any sort or kind." "Yes, and there's no ferry boat either," answered Gretel. "These are even better than pebbles," said Hansel, and crammed his pockets full of them. Gretel said, "I too will bring something home," and she filled her apron full. "Now," said Hansel, "let's go and get well away from the witch's wood." When they had wandered about for some hours, they came to a big lake. "We can't get over," said Hansel. "I see no bridge of any sort or kind." "Yes, and there's no ferry boat either," answered Gretel. "But look, there swims a white duck. If I ask her, she'll help us over." And she called out, "Here are two children, mournful very, seeing neither bridge nor ferry. Take us upon your white back, and row us over, quack, quack." The duck swam towards them, and Hansel got on her back and bade his little sister sit beside him. "No," answered Gretel, "we should be too heavy a load for the duck. She shall carry us across separately." The good bird did this, and when they were landed safely on the other side, and had gone for a while, the wood became more and more familiar to them, and at length they saw their father's house in the distance. Then they set off to run, and bounding into the room fell on their father's neck. The man had not passed a happy hour since he left them in the wood, and the woman had died. Gretel shook out her apron so that the pearls and precious stones rolled about the room, and Hansel threw down one handful after the other out of his pocket. Thus all their troubles were ended, and they lived happily ever afterwards.